we talk about race, naturally, people talk about racism. How is it wrong to acknowledge race? How is it wrong to talk about race? And then it naturally leads into how the particular races are treated differently. And some say that there's racism against the non-whites by the whites. Increasingly, people say it's in reverse. It's gone so far in the other direction. Mm-hmm. But I think what is glaring is the historical context.
I think it's okay. I think everybody can be racist but white people.
Which people often miss, maybe on our side, people don't talk about or they refuse to acknowledge, is that we're coming up on maybe the end of 500 years of preeminence by Europeans, by whites. That's sort of the elephant in the room. That like non-whites, that's their preoccupation. And whites, because we are white, don't maybe even realize the gravity of this. But this has not always been the way of the world.
Right.
Because at various points in time, the Ottoman Turks were the pinnacle of civilization, or the Islamic Caliphate, or the Chinese. And at various times, the relative distribution of wealth and power was different, meaning that maybe there was some parity between the Orient and the West. And of course, these uncontacted, more primitive civilizations like Africa and America didn't have to deal with white people. But we're talking about 500 years of whites, because of the Industrial Revolution, because of the Enlightenment, rapidly gaining relative power and then imposing that power on other people and systematizing that power. And it's in this context, this is where you get this Marxist definition of racism, where they say, well, it's prejudice plus power. And the power is sort of critical.
Right. Which is why like a black person, a minority, can't be racist.
Right. Because
only white people can be racist.
Because they say, well, you can't inflict these like attitudes on people using power either overtly or in a more subtle way. And I would say that, you know, that's just kind of like rhetoric. I mean, to me, it is obviously true, and it's even also true to this day that European civilization predominates, but it doesn't make it any less true what's happening with these other people, right. The black people. And by the way, I would say to the contrary, it almost proves what we're saying about these groups or the disparities between them, because the sensitivity lies in that black and brown people, and even Asians on some level, have been under the heel of the whites for 500 years. And the way they say it is like they drew the short end of the stick. It's because whites are violent or whites are cruel. I would say it's because whites were more developed. That's the elephant in the room.
I will say, you can't say more cruel because niggas had Genghis Khan and fucking Attila the Hun. Yeah, you don't want to know about them niggas. And then they had Vlad the Impaler. It was a lot of niggas. It was a lot of deadly ass niggas that weren't white. We had Shaka Zulu. Come on, bro. Yeah, y'all thought he was fake?
Nobody wants to. Because where even do you get the power dynamic? Right. It's that whites were able to inflict on other people because of their technological prowess, their organization, their societal development. And these other civilizations were weak. You know, Columbus Day, we're shooting this around Columbus Day. It's not that they weren't willing to inflict that, they couldn't.
That's right.
And they couldn't because they didn't have our level of development.
And with anyone that they could, they did.
Exactly.
Right? Like, it wasn't missiles, but it was rocks or whatever. But you think of, you know, historically Africa, it's not like a bunch of Europeans were running through the jungle, you know, and capturing people. They were lined up on the beach to be sold by other blacks.
Right.
You know, so everybody has been oppressive.
Right.
White people just did it exceedingly well.
Yes, excelled at organized violence, which is the highest. It's basically, in terms of human activity, it's the highest aspiration. You know, Patton had a quote like this: "It's the highest thing that a person can aspire to," because, that's ultimately what the history of humanity is conflict, organized conflict between groups. And so there's a reckoning now about this. And, you know, the browns and blacks are saying, well, we have been subjugated and we have drawn the short end of the stick. We have less resources, less power. And that means that our lives and organizations have been dictated to us by whites. And whites are saying, well, there's a reason for that.
Right.
And you sort of see these things now playing out within America, now that we have a very diverse country.
Right.
And I think that regardless, this is an inflection point for the history of the world, because it's always been a clash of civilizations. But now I think for the first time, the clash is happening on the interior. It's happening from within. It's happening inside the border through politics.
I've taken methylene blue because it's
Hey, you.
off your order by going to Nutricell.store.
And so it's sort of a difficult way to look at it, because our generation, we're from different generations, but closely together in the grand scheme of things. We've been brought up with this rhetoric that's been meant to soften the edges of the racial divide. And so I think we're coming at it with like basically an ahistorical perspective. Because the other thing that people don't want to acknowledge is that everyone for all time, except for the past 30 years, was like a vile racist, according to our standards.
Right.
Even George Washington, even Thomas Jefferson, even Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, he was absolutely a white supremacist. There was like no debating it, and was really uncharitable in a lot of ways. That like
He wanted
all
to send us
the
back.
guys who defended, the Southern Presbyterian Christian men. And I believe
it wasn't a
they were
bad
good.
idea.
And I'm not going to apologize for my Christian fathers, but
I'm glad he
they
did
were defending the slavery, but not the slave trade. Like R.L. Dabney, he thought that the slave trade was a breach of like Exodus chapter 21 and certain biblical principles of man stealing and those things. But he had ways of, it wasn't just arbitrary. Like he had arguments, so he had ways of articulating. Well, okay, the man stealer is punishable according to Exodus 21 by death. Anyone found in possession of someone who was stolen. But that's kind of like a 1 degree of separation. But what do you do when it's the third generation of people who their grandfather or even fourth generation great-grandfather was stolen by these people, this tribe that defeated this tribe and sold them to this other tribe, then they sold them to Jews, then Jews sold them to Europeans, and so he was basically saying, like, at this point, many of the slaves in America, they only speak English. They're Christians now. They've been catechized. They're actually participating in these white churches as members, brothers in Christ. Yes, Monday through Saturday, there's still a master-slave dynamic. Ephesians 6 talks to this. It's in the Bible. But they are our brothers in Christ. They're in the church. They only speak English. Where are they going to go? Abraham Lincoln was like, well, maybe we can drop them off in Africa, which is actually really inhumane. I mean, they'd be dropped off, like 3 generations later, probably thousands of miles from where their ancestors were taken, can't even speak the language, have no, it's really cruel.
We
so the
fucked.
question is like, okay, well, if we free the slaves, but we're not also, sending them back across, the ocean, then where do they go here? And, there were some guys who suggested, well, we can send them out west, and give them, and Abraham Lincoln and some of the northern guys were like, no. And they were like, why? Because we want to settle that area and we don't want them as neighbors. So they were like, they have to be freed. And they also still have to stay right next door to all the Southerners. And, and so the South was like, wait, what? I don't understand. And it's like, why? You really love black people, right? And they're like, no, that's not our position. We hate them. We just don't want them to, to be enslaved. And also we don't want you guys to succeed. So but the point is, like, you look back and it's like anybody who's labeled as a racist today is pretty much like a liberal by comparison to just 100 years ago, what the average person thought. I don't think there's a racist, like true racist, alive currently.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if there are, they're exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't even know that history.
Right.
That it's sort of like with World War II and the Holocaust. Like many people think we went to World War II to stop the Holocaust.
Right.
In the same way that people think we went to war to free the slaves, for the good of humanity.
Imagine.
It's cute.
And it's a nice story.
You almost don't want to pop the bubble for them. Just leave them there. Let them think it.
Yeah, but no, and I like that you said that. People don't even know. Abraham Lincoln was committed to creating colonies where we could send all the black people in either Africa or Central America.
Yeah, I told you
and
he
the only
wanted to send
reason
us
it didn't
back.
happen is because he died when he was trying to do it. And there was very contentious inside the government. But that was the original plan. And then even beyond the plan, to repatriate them for hundreds of years. All the presidents said there will never be legal, social equality, political equality between the whites and the blacks in the same political, the body politic. They just said that's just never going to happen. And what has happened since is basically out of white guilt. We have come up with now this suicidal ideology where, and by the way, it's not even sufficient that we integrate the people that were forcibly brought here, which arguably might be some form of a reparation. I'm not making that argument, but some might argue, well, these people are brought here against their will. Now you have to integrate them. Okay.
Real quick, though, what you would say, what's the real reparation? You get to live in America.
Right.
That's what I was thinking.
Bless. Like, what a privilege. Privilege for me, privilege for you. Like, the richest black people on God's green earth.
Shit, I'm lit.
African.
I ain't gotta I ain't gotta go to the fucking well to get no fucking water. I ain't gotta lock the gate so the lion don't jump over and attack me. You know, I don't gotta, worry about niggas eating each other in the fucking woods. I don't gotta worry about that shit. I just, get in my car and go to work and shit. Got a $2,500 computer, get on the stream and, relax. Got internet and shit over here.
Haiti, Africa. I mean, take your pick.
Go ahead.
But yeah, no.
Good.
Arguably, we would
Straight.
have to do that. But now what we're talking about is making America a majority non-white country. Who thinks that's a good idea?
Right.
Is there one person who thinks that America will get better? And for who? Certainly not for the native people living here, not for the white people, probably not even for the black people.
Right.
The only people this is good for is the foreigners themselves. And what's really interesting also is that...
Because you got to understand, it's not like we're having way more kids than the white people. We're not having kids either. We're getting outpaced by the foreigners too. So you niggas keep thinking, oh, the white people are about to get erased. Nigga, you're about to get erased. The fuck? It's only 13% of us, nigga.
You were in this post-racial project out of an abundance of white guilt. We feel sorry for the colonized, the indigenous, the poor of the world. We're bringing them here. It makes white people feel better about themselves to have that around. And I think, though, that, and this is an important distinction, a lot of the people that propagated this, it was kind of sold to them as not actually what it is. Because what it is that there's going to be no majority, no dominant cultural force, there won't be
No hegemony.
a plurality of any group. It will be completely diverse. But it was sold to them as like whites plus, white country with some diversity. And I think even that would be acceptable. And I was talking about this, I think, with Gavin McInnes. It's like if you're in a neighborhood of all white people and one black family moves in and they're nice and well-mannered and respectful, would anyone really have a problem with that?
No.
If it was all whites and some black people, I don't think so. Not as long as everybody was following the laws, or for that matter, an Indian family or a Chinese family or Mexican family. I don't think.
I have a Muslim family in my neighborhood that I used to stay in. They were such nice people, very nice people.
So,
And what's so funny, what I found in my neighborhood was so funny is that it was all black people where we were like actually black. We wasn't niggas. So like it was no walking outside, sagging niggas just walking outside, smoking and shit, hanging out and shit. Like it wasn't none of that niggatry going on. So that's like the first time I've ever seen some shit like that. Where it's just all, and I think we had like one white family in there that lived like down the hill or some shit, but everybody else was black. Yeah, it was some people like, I ain't never seen that shit before. I'm trying to tell you. And it gives us a fucking commercial.
Dear Dr. Hansen.
But yeah, we had one like Muslim family live down the hill, down the street, straight. They was cool.
The Fuentes.
right, like the Fuentes clan. We're nice enough, They were, the Fuenteses were drug addicts. My grandfather was a heroin addict, so maybe not the best, but over generations we assimilate, right? But, and maybe it's two families. Okay, that's not so bad. I mean, it's 90% white. But the question is, what happens when that neighborhood becomes 90-10 in the other direction?
Right.
Now not so comfortable. And that's really the way that I like to frame the race issue in America. Historically, it was whites with some blacks. Now it's going to be all non-whites with some whites. And that's a whole different story. That's a whole different country. That's a different dynamic. You can't call that immigration. And you start to say that, well, we now are actually losing something that we're entitled to, which is the ability to have our way of life represented. And you think about a future where there will be Chinatown in America. Right. There will be Little India, Little Haiti, Little Cuba, whatever. Will there even be a single city or suburb that is meaningfully European or white, where they actually have any kind of ethnic heritage, cultural heritage? I think the answer is no on this timeline.
Right.
And that has already happened, by the way, in Canada.
Yeah.
In Canada, they have imported like 50% of their population the past 25 years. And it is entire cities and towns that have been taken over where there are literally no white people.
Even in the UK,
that is
they've been overrun by the Jeets. Like,
definition, the suicide of a country.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot that could be said about race, excesses of racism or identitarian thought, identifying too much with race. And these things are not quantitative. You can't say how white is a person. You could go to their genetics, but people have a different phenotype,
right?
Different characteristics and things like that. So it's qualitative and it's rough. But we could say that certainly we're not racial enough. Let's put it that way. Nobody would argue that we should be a completely racial society. Whites only. We only want, and everyone that isn't white, we don't like. I don't think anyone's saying that.
Right.
But people are saying the country's becoming not racial enough. And white people in particular do not have enough of an affinity or pride in themselves to even protect the identity of their nation. That's really the issue.
That's very well said.
Yeah.
So let's spend maybe the second half of the episode, but one final big idea. So we've talked about race, but I'd be really curious because I've heard some of those things from you before, and I pretty much agree with all of it. Like sometimes you're in the final segment of the show, it's the super chats. You're on your seventh hour and getting a little loosey goosey, and so you'll word it in ways that I wouldn't word it. But I think your position I agree with. But race aside, let's now talk about how do you? Because I don't hear you talk about this as much. How do you account for race? How do you account for why are there different? As a Christian, you believe the Bible, right? But you're also you're not a Neanderthal. You believe the Bible. You also have your sense perception and reason and science and those kinds of things. So I'd just be curious. You're a bright guy. How do you account for race? The fact that we have different races, different strengths, different weaknesses. Some have fared better than others. How do you, in a way that holds the Bible, doesn't contradict it, but then also accounting for other things? How do you account for race?
Well, I think the origin of the races is that you go back to the original people that were created by God and descended from Adam, and they went out into the world. And I think they reflect the different tribes and different descendants. And as far as their relative position, well, first I would say that I always go back to the Tower of Babel. When people talk about the universalism of Christianity, I go back to the idea that God wants actually for there to be nations. He created the nations.
Correct.
There was a point where we're all coming together and then the people were scattered.
It wasn't good.
Right.
Like I always tell people, it was a judgment. So there were two sins. It says, let's build, a tower that stretches to the heavens so that we can be as God and make a great name for ourselves. So one sin, arrogance, pride, trying to deify themselves, be as God. And so God judges. There's a judgment. Babel is a judgment for the sin of arrogance. However, that's not the only sin. It also says, they finish and say, lest we be scattered over the face of the earth. And I do think that actually represents the second sin. First sin, arrogance, tower that stretches to the heavens, make a name for ourselves, be as God. Second sin, not be scattered over the face of the earth. Well, the dominion mandate that was given to Adam in the garden was be fruitful and multiply and subdue the whole earth. Like the original plan was not just that there would be a lot of people, but that these people would ultimately spread out and fill up the whole earth. And so then the Tower of Babel, you literally have them saying the very thing that God commanded Adam to do, let's not do it. Let's build this tower and make this great name for ourselves so that we can congregate and stagnate and bottleneck and not fulfill the very thing that God commanded our ancestor Adam to do, so that we would not be spread out over the earth. So I think two sins: one, arrogance, let's be like God; two, let's not fulfill the dominion mandate and spread out. Because I actually think that without the Tower of Babel, God's providential plan likely would have resulted in different dialects, which would have evolved into different languages. And, some people would live in the mountains and some people in cold regions and hot regions and seafaring people. And over time, just the different distinctions of the geography itself and different places and different climates and being, separated from people,
I feel like the only thing that really helps it is we would literally have to force everybody to be Christian. Like we would literally have to force motherfuckers to be Christian, and force them to go and read go to church, study and shit. We would have to force niggas to do that shit. That's the only way I feel like that would really cancel anything out. Would have lent to it all would have snowballed into different languages, different cultures, different peoples, different people. So the nations were God's plan, and you literally have a group of people saying no. And so I think, when God confuses their languages, the way that I teach this, in our church and as a pastor is that you have a judgment for the sin of arrogance. And the second sin that I think people miss, the sin of not wanting to be fruitful, multiply, and spread out and fill the earth. And in that sense, it's a judgment, but it's a judgment that conceals, because God is exceedingly kind, it's a judgment that conceals a hidden mercy. Like within this judgment of confusing their languages so that they would disperse, there's also a mercy. And the mercy is, you guys are trying to get off the rails from my original plan, and I'm going to judge you for that sin of rebellion, but in such a way that it actually functions as a catalyst to more quickly fulfill my plan, which is all the plans of God, a good plan. You're welcome.
Yeah.
So back to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard that angle before on the Tower of Babel.
What do you think? Crazy or?
No, I think that's true. I think that there's a lot in that story, and I agree with that. But I would say that as far as the disparities, a lot of it does come down to geography.
Yes.
I think that's a huge part of it. And
It is.
There's been many theories on this, and one of the most prominent theories is that the people of the North, because they have the winter, have to plan for the future.
Right.
And ultimately, that is what separates, in terms of IQ, in terms of development, it's that long-term planning.
Right.
Seems to be the difference maker, because where you have warmer climate and you don't have to plan for the winter, you just have game year round. You never actually move beyond a nomadic society.
You, just you, building your app on Base 44.
To an agrarian society. And without that, you don't even have a concept of the future. For a long time, there was like a famous post on 4chan that went viral, and who knows if it was real or fake, but it was a person who claimed to be someone who worked in Africa and said they literally do not have a word for the future. And we would give them money, we'd try to get them to plant seeds, but they just had no concept of sowing and reaping, no concept of kind of like
Delayed gratification.
Right? That time preference. And of course, if people are just hunting and gathering all the time, there's really no need actually ever. It's all cyclical rather than progressive in a certain sense. And so this is why they say the Europeans developed the highest IQ, because they faced these cold, tough winters. And they came with other things too. They had these very tight-knit clans, and other there's other selection biases there, but they say that basically it's a geographic determinism.
I like that. I've never heard that before, but that's a fucking great point, because facts, when you have to worry about storing the food and getting enough food for everybody, you kind of have to think I gotta save this, like we gotta do that. Can't just eat everything and know you're gonna be able to go out tomorrow and get some more. Whereas they know they're just gonna go out and tomorrow and just do the same thing and get some more. So there's no reason for us to think ahead. Oh man.
And
Fuck.
here's another example, which I heard recently. They say that one of the reasons the American Indians practice so much cannibalism is because their diet consisted largely of corn. And they were starved of protein, actually, because their diet being mostly maize, it actually has no nutritional content. And so what they needed was protein from flesh. I guess they couldn't get it from animals. So that's why they developed this like bloodthirst. I heard that on Twitter. I don't know if that's real or not, but
Well, you heard it on Twitter.
so it must be, must have some basis in reality. But so I think it almost always goes back to nutrition. It always goes back to geography. It goes back to the basics. I
Like
think.
there actually are basic explanations, is what you're saying. So I think that's entirely true. The only thing that I would add to it, and I just want to hear your response, is I would also, put some stock in the biblical narrative, just like we did with Babel. But then, that's on the heels of also the three sons of Noah. So, a global flood in which everything that had the breath of air in its lungs was wiped out, is what the Bible says, Genesis 9:10. And except for Noah, his wife, 3 sons, and their 3 wives, 8 persons in all saved through the ark and the passage of water. And when the ark finally comes to rest, one of the sons is, he uncovers his father's nakedness. Now, I take that to mean that you look at Leviticus, you shall not uncover your father's nakedness. It's not like dad's naked and you point and laugh. It's to uncover your father's nakedness is to sleep with his wife. So I think it was a sexual immorality. And it seems as though Noah recognizes this around the time that his grandson is born, Canaan, and he says, "Cursed be Canaan." And I think part of the reason he says, "Cursed be Canaan," is I think there was probably something physical, like visibly detectable, that Noah saw. His grandson was like, "You slept with mom," like something like that. So that's not explicit in the text, but I think it's a plausible inference. Exegetically, it's allowed. It's not heresy. But the son is technically the grandson, Canaan, is cursed. Now, guys exegete it different ways. Some guys say that Ham, the father, Noah's son, and the father of Canaan, was generally cursed, and Canaan particularly cursed. And that, of course, comes to pass in the fact that Joshua, centuries later, wipes out all the Canaanites. Like, obviously, Canaan really was cursed and really did pay a heavy price. All the Canaanites wiped out by the Israelites. But then maybe a general curse for the father and all his other sons besides Canaan, the Hamites. But even if that's not, because some guys will say no, but it doesn't say cursed is Ham, and that's fine. I think that that's plausible also, that it was just a curse for Canaan, the grandson, and not for Ham. But what we can say for sure is even if Ham was not cursed, he wasn't blessed. Whereas the other 2 sons of Noah were blessed for doing the right thing and not uncovering their father's nakedness and actually correcting and rebuking their brother, when he did this wicked thing in the sight of the Lord. And, so one of them is particularly blessed, Japheth, and the other, Shem is partially blessed. And, but Ham is either cursed or at least not blessed. And that automatically is a hierarchy of blessing from the Lord. And so then their descendants and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And so I think there's some stock there. I think that in the finished work of Christ, though, I think he levels the playing field. So I really do think that in the finished work of Christ that he comes to make his blessings flow as far as the curse is found. And so if there was a curse of Ham, I don't think there is anymore. I think that's been broken. However, another one of those scenarios was like, you got to let him cook. Like if Ham and his descendants were cursed, or even just his 2 brothers were exceedingly blessed and he was not, but that was the state. That's a prophetic word from the Lord spoken through Noah, their father. If that was a state for centuries and centuries and centuries until Christ came, that has massive implications. And then if descendants of Ham, this curse is broken, but it wasn't even broken until 2,000 years ago, and it had all of its effects for centuries leading up to that. And even though it's broken, a lot of places in sub-Saharan Africa didn't even hear the gospel Like Jesus came 2,000 years ago, but the gospel didn't come to certain regions until 200 years ago.
Right.
You know, so it takes time. You know what I mean? So I think there's the geographic way of accounting, and I think there's true. I'm kind of both persuasions. So
Nah, I like the answer that Nick gave us with the geographical positions and why they had to do that, because it makes perfect sense. Like, understand, them niggas are still doing the same shit over there. They're still doing the same shit over there. All right, they are still doing this. So it's like it's hard to like argue the point because the niggas really are still doing that shit over there.